opportunity. My most important title is immigrant. All the work that I have done is all because I was here as an undocumented child, and my parents and my family together, we worked so hard in this country, and all of that other stuff is just a reflection of my family's immigrant work ethic and our commitment to making life better for our families and for our country that we now live in. But I was born in Mexico and had the great fortune of my parents bringing me here when I was a small child. And I share that story with you. I start with that story because I want you to know that I have seen how our voices matter. From being a young girl who didn't have a green card or citizenship or anything, and I saw people advocate for me where I was able to become a US citizen. And that's you now, right? Everything that you're learning, everything that you're doing right now is because you're thinking about somebody else that you don't know, but whose life you're going to change using your voice and your leadership and your advocacy. So I just want to say, as the little 13-year-old girl that didn't know there were people out there doing this for me, thank you. Thank you for our community, who we know is currently really being chased in the streets and challenged in the courtrooms. We need everyone to be standing up. Today we have the great fortune of hearing from two candidates who are running to be your governor. They want to be the governor of Colorado. Why does that matter? Why do we care about these gubernatorial candidates? There's two reasons I want to tell you about. The first is when you go tomorrow to lobby at the legislature, the governor has a formal role in that. Once the legislature passes a bill, the governors are the ones that choose to sign the law into action. They can choose to veto the bill, meaning they're not going to pass that bill, or they cannot do anything and the bill by itself just eventually becomes law. So the governor has a role in the lawmaking process. And this is why it is so important for us to hear today from these candidates about what they think and where they're going to stand and what are they going to say on the bills that come across their desk. Secondly, and just as importantly though, governors have a leadership role, right? They represent the state of Colorado. Who represents us as governor matters. They have the ability to influence what bills are even talked about. They have the ability with their office to influence what bills are moving faster or slower. So there's a lot of that informal leadership that is very important in the role of the governor. And that is why we here today, as Latinas and Latinos from across the state of Colorado, want to know what the governor will do. What will they champion? What issues and rights are they going to ensure are protected? So we're going to hear from two of the top candidates, because one of these could be the next governor. And I think it's very important that we listen carefully, right? Because we're in this room today, but not all of our families here, not all of our friends, not all of our neighbors are here. So listen, please, to what these two candidates have to say as to their experiences, their thoughts, and how they're going to lead on issues. Y luego, a recorrer las voces, right? We are the trusted messengers in our community. We are the ones that are going to listen, absorb, and take it out into our community, into our kitchen tables, into our classrooms, wherever you are. Share the message of what you're hearing today. Because us understanding the candidates and what they represent, what they're going to lead on, that's what we have to use to inform ourselves, either if we're eligible to vote, when we vote, and if we're not eligible to vote, when our friends and family who are voting, right? That's how we work. con los madrinas y padrinos that are sharing and telling our stories. And so I just ask you today to listen carefully, thoughtfully, patiently, because we will hopefully see that then move out into our communities. And so I would like to just very quickly take a moment to introduce my colleagues up here on the stage. Alex Sanchez, President and CEO of Voces Unidas Action Fund. And Alex has been someone who's been fighting in our community probably the minute he came out of the womb. Somebody who really, truly is invested and cares deeply about our communities, not just here in Denver, but with Voces Unidas de las Montañas out in the mountain communities and all over the state of Colorado. So welcome, Alex. And Vanessa? Vanessa will be joining us today. She is really the backbone and the heartbeat of Color Action Fund. I can tell you that none of this comes together without the hard work of Vanessa. And joining us here in 30 seconds, I believe, is our senator, our current senator, Michael Bennet. And I just want to say one quick background on Senator Bennet. He is right now Colorado's senior U.S. Senator, and he's in his third term representing Colorado in Washington, D.C., and he previously served as the superintendent of Denver Public Schools. So welcome. Senator, you want to come on up? You can come up on this side.
Hi, Alex. How are you? Nice to see you, man. It's good to see you. Hey, how are you?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too. Hi.
How are you?
I'm well.
So good to see you. You
Thank
can
you.
take the hot seat.
Thank you. I hope not too hot a seat.
Not too
we'll
hot.
see.
Let's see if there's
Good
a
morning.
big beam of light there. Well, Senator Bennet, we'd like to give you 5 minutes here to make your opening remarks. Could you, as you're talking about how you want to welcome this beautiful crowd on this cold Sunday morning, could you cover why Colorado Latinas and Latinos should support your candidacy?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is this a good level? I just want to say good morning on this cold and snowy day, and I'm very, very happy for Colorado that we actually got a little bit of snow, because this is a potentially devastating moment for us in terms of water, so we have one more thing that we're wrestling with. But some of you know this, but I just, for those of you that don't, I want to remind you that my mom was born in Poland in 1938. That was the year that the Nazis invaded Poland, or the year before. And she and her parents survived that war. An aunt survived that war. Everyone else was killed. And during the course of the war, she was separated from her parents for 3 years. And she was told that her parents were dead. And when Donald Trump started to separate children from their parents at the border, the first time he was elected president, my mom called me. She's still alive. She's alive today. And she said, "I see myself in the children at the border." And I knew what she meant by that, because I understood what that emotional trauma looks like, not just for my mom, who's had it for a lifetime because of what happened to her as a little child, but also for her children. And I'm one of those children. And even though I'm now 61 years old, I still bear that trauma through the experiences that people have when they feel like they can't count on the rule of law. They can't count on anybody to protect them from violence. They can't count on people to keep them from being separated from their parents. And when I was superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, as you mentioned, I was, before I was in politics, it became very, very important to me to make sure that the immigrant children in the Denver Public Schools had access to higher education here in the state of Colorado. And we fought together to make sure that our kids that were undocumented had access to in-state tuition. And then I went to the Senate and fought for comprehensive immigration reform, was one of the 4 Democrats who wrote the last bill that passed the U.S. Senate, passed with 68 votes, that had a pathway to citizenship for 11 million people. It had the most progressive DREAM Act that had ever been written. It had the visa work that's so important to all of Colorado and our economy, our rural economy, our mountain communities. And it had border security that was agreed to by everybody that was voting on the floor of the Senate that day who voted for the legislation. Tragically, it was killed in the House of Representatives. Tragically, there were people in America who wanted to use immigration and immigrants as a political statement rather than trying to fix the issue for the benefit of America. And tragically, as a result of that, we got Donald Trump. So I just want you to know that history is my history when it comes to those issues. And it's one of the reasons why I want to be governor. I believe that Colorado can project an image that's not just about fighting Trump. We have to fight Trump. We need somebody who's tough enough and experienced enough to fight Trump. But it's also having somebody who's got a vision for the productive and positive role that immigrants and immigration play in our economy, that the critical aspect that immigration and immigrants have meant for our culture and our history here in Colorado and as a nation. And I want you to know, I will be an advocate not just for fighting Trump, but for fighting for an immigration system in America that supports all of us, that supports people like my mom. And at the same time, we're going to talk about this today. I know very well that we have an economy that is not supporting working people in Colorado at all. We have to stop coloring inside the lines in this state if we're going to be a state where working people can afford housing, health care, child care. If our education system is one that's actually preparing our kids, no matter where they come from, for the economy that they're inheriting. We are not remotely doing any of that as a state. And I believe this is a moment where the states need to lead that fight too for economic opportunity and for economic justice. I believe that the proposals I put forward in this campaign will do much more for working people than my opponents have in this campaign. And I look forward to working with you, not just today, but after the election is over and when we've got to make some very, very tough decisions. Thank you for having me this morning. And thank you for keeping time.
I very much appreciate those opening remarks, and I actually remember the heartbreak when we were working on that immigration reform bill. So let's get started and talk about some of the issues that Latinos and Latinas here in Colorado have said are the most important to us, reflected in the Colorado Latino Agenda Research Initiative. And we're going to start with what you just ended on, the economy, housing, and affordability issues. For 5 straight years of polling, Latinos in Colorado have put kitchen table economics as top of the agenda. Cost of living and wages are the #1 concern. In 2025, the top state priorities were improving wage and income, addressing the risk of cost of living and inflation, with affordable housing right behind as the top priorities. So in 2025, housing costs continue to outpace wages, and Latinos continue to say that whatever politicians have done on housing in the last few years, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing the benefit in our community, and we don't see a difference in housing affordability despite the headlines. So we're going to start with this question. What will you do as governor in the first 100 days and the first year to get wages up, bring costs down, and make housing affordable for working Latino families?
Well, I think that I've read the poll every year that Alex has brought to Washington, D.C., and you're right. The economic issues, the kitchen table issues are always the ones at the top, and that never surprises me. That never surprises me. You know, I think one of the reasons why the Democratic Party, by the way, I blame Trump for all kinds of things, and I'm sure everybody in this room does, but getting elected is not one of those things. I blame the Democratic Party for losing 2 elections to Trump. We should never have lost 1 election to Trump. And then the American people took 4 years off and they sent Trump back. And the reason I think for that, there are a bunch of reasons, but I think the central reason is because of the economic challenges that you're facing. You know, while we're focused on Trump, 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 I don't mean the people in this room, I mean the Democratic Party, The people that I meet every day in Colorado are focused on rent, they're focused on groceries, they're focused on the fact that they can't afford housing or that they can't afford childcare. And that's what we have to fix. And the Latino respondents to that poll, I agree 100%. We have not done what needs to be done. If we had done what needed to be done in Colorado, we wouldn't have the second most expensive housing in America. We wouldn't have the 5th most expensive child care in America. And so my housing plan says that we should be the first state in America where no working person has to spend more than 70% of their income on housing. No one has ever run for governor of any state in America and said that. I'm saying we should do that. That should be our goal. Because for me, anybody who spends more than 70%, and I know there are people in this room, there are all over Colorado, people who are spending 40%, 50%, 60% of their income in housing. There are people living in mobile home parks in the Roaring Fork Valley or outside of Fort Collins who are spending 50 and 60% of their income on housing. And if you're doing that, you can't afford a middle-class life. You can't save for the next generation. You can't buy your kids the school clothes that they need. You can't have a hope of buying childcare. And so for us to do that, we're going to have to build a lot more housing in Colorado, but not housing just for rich people, which is what we have been doing for the last 15 or 20 years, but housing for working people and affordable housing for the poorest people in our communities. And I've said that I would use the state balance sheet to underwrite that housing, to make it possible for us to build it more cheaply. I've said on the first day, what I'd like to do is show up and cut red tape so we can build starter homes in Colorado again, so we can build condominiums in Colorado again, so that families can actually not just rent places that are unaffordable for them, but so their families can actually begin to own housing in America, which is how the American dream is supposed to work, at a low price, and then over time be able to invest in more expensive housing.
Thank you, Senator. Vanessa has another question, and so does Alex, on this topic still.
If I was too over on time, somebody needs to tell me because I didn't know that.
I will more gently prod you.
Just feel free. Just tell me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Senator. You
can tell I'm a little passionate about this issue.
As we've established, working families need to make a livable wage. After years of advocacy, Colorado finally passed the Agricultural Worker Bill of Rights, which in part improved overtime rules for agricultural workers. But now, this session, some lawmakers and business interests who probably have never picked fruits and other produce in the scorching sun want to raise the number of hours an agricultural worker must work to get overtime pay. We oppose Senate Bill 26-121, which would raise this number of hours. Another bill, Senate Bill 2681, which we support, would set 40 hours as the standard work week for agricultural workers, just like everyone else. Where do you stand on the issue of fairness and dignity for agricultural workers, and what would you do as governor to support essential workers?
Well, essential workers, is that what you said? Well, first of all, fairness and dignity are the right words. You know, one of the reasons why I think our current immigration fight is so tragic is that we are losing sight in this nation of the contribution that immigrants have made to our agricultural community and into rural America. Obviously, the contributions are much broader than just that, but that's a very, very important part of what immigrants have done. And I have spent many, many years working with the leadership, the president and the new president of the National Farm Workers Union to make sure that at the national level, we are passing legislation and working to make sure that we have fairness and dignity for farm workers all over this country. And I would expect to continue that work as your governor. You know, I have spent a lot of time over the years with people whose families are in rural Colorado, who are essential to the economy of rural Colorado, many of whom are parents who have been here for 20 or 30 years but don't yet have immigration status, but whose children are American citizens. And they are, in some sense, in some ways, the most vulnerable members of our entire community. And I will continue to show up in those communities as governor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and move to health and repro justice. And just so that you're aware, I'll initiate the question, and then Vanessa and Alex will follow up with additional questions. From 2021 to 2025, Latinas and Latinos consistently identified healthcare as a constant pressure because it's tied directly to whether families can work, stay housed, and survive emergencies. Latinos in Colorado were already the highest uninsured groups, and this is getting worse because of drastic cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, as well as the expired health care tax credits. Over 280,000 Coloradans are expected to lose health coverage because of those changes, and Latino and the immigrant community members will be some of the groups most disproportionately impacted. So can you tell us how you will protect affordable health coverage for all Latinos, including for immigrants who have the least options for coverage, and defend bodily autonomy so healthcare decisions stay with the patients, not politicians?
I think let me take the last question first, which is, I think it is an unbelievable tragedy that this country elected Trump, as I said, the first time, and he took away a woman's right to choose. It's the first civil right we've lost in America since Reconstruction after the Civil War. So if you want to feel about what it feels like to be in a democracy where you're getting weaker, not stronger, it's one where you're giving up rights, not adding rights. It's one where you're excluding people, not including people. And that's the situation that we have right now. Part of that is tied to the economy that we were talking about earlier, because when people feel like even if they're working hard, their family can't get ahead, that raises a question about whether a democracy will even work. And healthcare is at the heart of this. So if I had to pick the top two issues, and didn't respond to the poll, but I would say housing is number one and healthcare is right there behind it. And my view is that our healthcare system is broken. I think we live in the richest country in the world. We should have a universal healthcare system in the United States of America. It is ridiculous that our families are having to pay what they're having to pay for healthcare. It's why I have said, if you elect me governor, I will fight for a true public option for people in this state so that we don't have to rely on private insurance if we don't want to have private insurance. I've been fighting for that, by the way, since I was the 60th vote for the Affordable Care Act when we passed it back in the Obama years. I said we should put a public option in place for families to have that option, and we have never done it. As governor, it's the first thing that I put in my health care plan. I also think people should have access to be able to buy the same insurance that the state employees have in Denver. County workers, municipal workers, the people that are working in our child care centers. None of these people should have to fight with the insurance company all their lives. And what's happening to families all over our state is that their insurance is getting more and more expensive, and their deductible is getting higher and higher and higher. I think people should not have to buy useless insurance as part of their way to be able to protect their children and their families.
Thanks, Senator. You actually just set me up for a great follow-up.
Uh-oh.
As you know, our state budget is facing almost $1 billion deficit. Recent proposals to balance our state budget plan to disproportionately cut health coverage programs for rural and low-income Coloradans, and specifically for immigrant community members who already have the fewest options. What concrete steps will your administration take to address these inequities and ensure fiscal pressures don't eliminate access to affordable health care for our most impacted communities? So how will you make sure people who have the fewest options can still afford to get the care they desperately need?
And this is another really, we have all these issues bearing down on us. The lack of water, the economic issues. Do we have an economy that's growing? The fiscal problem at the state capitol. It's one thing, I would say, whether our education system's actually supporting kids all over Colorado. These are massive issues that we have. In order to be able to actually address them, we're going to have to build a political coalition all across our state, rural and urban, that's inclusive. And I just want to say that I think that I'm the person with the experience in this campaign to be able to do that. And on health care, let me just say, you said it and you said it. They came after us on the Affordable Care Act tax subsidies, and that was a terrible disaster for Colorado, although the health care is even unaffordable even with those subsidies. So it's not like Trump made matters worse, but what the status quo in my mind was not acceptable. And then on Medicaid, which is a hugely important safety net program that we have as a state, we're looking at 9% annual increases in the Medicaid budget between now and 10 years from now. We can decide how to deal with that. We can do it by treating it as a one-year crisis and making cuts every single year, which is how the legislature is dealing with it now. Or we can elect a governor who's going to say, look, I know the federal government's not riding to our rescue anytime soon, which I believe. We need a 10-year plan for healthcare in Colorado, and we've got to manage our Medicaid system so that we're reducing costs not by cutting people, but by making sure that we're focused on primary care. Do people have access to doctors? Do people have access to labs for themselves and for their children? Are we able to keep people out of the hospital so we're not spending a whole bunch of money on chronic care that's incredibly expensive? Are we designing the system so that we're driving efficiencies? I think that's what our whole nation needs to do. But Colorado's going to have the chance to lead in that. It's not, I don't want you to, this is going to be very hard with these cuts. Yeah. Very, very hard with these cuts. But if we continue to treat it as an annual crisis, we will never solve the problem other than by making the cuts that you're describing. Yeah. We need to reinvent the way we deliver health care in this state.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move now to public safety and immigration. In Colorado, trust in law enforcement and government systems has been eroding for years. In 2022, 84% of Latinos said local law enforcement doesn't always treat Latinos with dignity and respect. Now let's fast forward to 2025, and that trust problem has become even more pronounced. Just over half of Latinos say they do not trust state agencies to keep their personal data safe and not share it with ICE. And a comparable share do not trust local police to not collaborate with ICE. So here's your question. How do you plan to protect due process, enforce the state's existing laws, prevent state and local government from violating community trust through backdoor immigration enforcement, and rebuilding legitimacy so families feel safe reporting crimes, seeking help, and participating in life?
Let me first of all say, we have to enforce Colorado's laws. We have to enforce the privacy laws that are on that book. We need to make sure that people are confident that that's what we're going to do, and I believe that is what we should do. You're pointing to a really important issue too, though, which is trust is broken right now between the community and between law enforcement. And that partly has to do with what we see playing out on the national front, and partly what we see playing out, especially in rural Colorado, from Durango to the mountains to Steamboat and everywhere in between, where we've seen families stop on the highway and their breadwinners taken to the jail in Aurora and then deported. We've seen families that have been split up, like the one in Durango, where the parents were sent back to Texas and then on their way to Mexico. And that has created a huge amount of fear that didn't exist even before that. Mm-hmm. And I think that we have to deal with that by pushing back on Trump, pushing back on those immigration policies, making sure that the state law is, as your question said, enforced, so that people feel like and know that their data is not going to be released, and that our local law enforcement is not acting as immigration agents. We don't need that either here in America or here in Colorado. But we do need to rebuild trust with local law enforcement in Colorado. We do need to build trust. And it will never, I've worked at the local level. I worked at the city and county of Denver when we put in a new system of police oversight that had actually never existed in the country before, to try to deal with a broken trust that existed. And I think that's what we're going to have to do here, is to make sure that we are not just when the headlines are out there, but that we are constantly trying to find ways for the community and for law enforcement to meet together out of the sight of cameras, to be able to discuss how families are feeling. By the way, I think this is not just a law enforcement issue. I think this is also a schools issue. There are a lot of parts of Colorado where people feel like their kids are going to school and they're not welcome, they're not feeling like they can be integrated into the school. It's the same sort of trust again. And this isn't just the community on whom that burden falls, it falls on all of us, including on law enforcement. And it makes us safer. It makes us safer. I think about families, well, I know Alex is going to ask a question, so I'll stop.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Alex.
Thank you for being here. Good
Thank
to
you
see
for having me.
As you have heard us say, there's two Colorados often. One that the urban communities experience and one that rural communities experience, and you're alluding to that. In rural Colorado, immigrant families are living with the reality that ICE has many helpers. A local interaction with law enforcement can quickly become a text thread with ICE. People in local jails can disappear into ICE custody in Garfield County and Mesa County, in La Plaza County. I can go on and on. And ICE is using not so secret satellite facilities. Some of them have been there for 10, 20 years, including in Garfield County, without any oversight. We know because we live in those communities. That is why many of this year's participants will be lobbying in support of House Bill 26-1276. It's a bill that tries to close some of these loopholes in state law. What do you believe Colorado's responsibility is to about stopping local systems from feeding the ICE pipeline and to ensure clear lines, real transparency, and meaningful oversight in all detention centers, not just in Aurora?
I think it's critically important, as I said earlier, that we defend, that we protect Colorado's laws when it comes to sharing personal information. And if there's more to do on that, I'm open to that, and we should discuss that. I still want to make the point too that we have to find ways of rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the community. I mean, that's something I've heard from the community. It's not Michael Bennet sitting up here on this stage. People are worried about their kids. People are worried about their families getting separated while people are traveling from home to work or home to school. And that's another part of it that we got to work on. On the detention facilities, I don't think we need any more detention facilities in Colorado. I have been a long opponent of private prisons. I don't think we should have private prisons in this country for law enforcement or for immigration purposes, including the GEO facility. And I think that, and we certainly don't need new ones on the eastern plains of Colorado or down in Walsenburg either, which is another thing we need to keep our eye on. So I'll continue to work on that, Alex. And I do agree with you on the rural-urban divide. I have spent more time in rural Colorado than any statewide elected official for probably a generation or two. And that's not been out of a sense of, political responsibility. It's because I love every single corner of this state, and I love the people of this state. I really do. And I feel at home in every single place, in every single neighborhood. And I want to bring that sense of belonging and confidence to the governor's job, and I want to use it to be able to bring people into our conversation, our political conversation, who may today feel like they are not as confident, or they may not feel like they belong in the same way. I believe everybody in this state belongs in this state, and every voice is important, and that's the kind of governor I will be.
Thank you, Senator. We are going to move into our last issue area for this portion of the town hall today. And our last issue area is education and environmental justice. I'm going to give you some startling statistics. It used to be that almost 100% of Latino parents trusted their teachers and their schools. In 2025, only 55% of Latinos say they're confident that their local school district has the expertise, knowledge, and willingness to eliminate the student achievement gap between Latino and white students. And only 55% are confident that districts can eliminate racism and discrimination in public education. On the environmental justice issue, 76% of Latinos say they are concerned about the impacts of climate change, and 84% want Colorado to protect communities located near oil and gas extraction sites from environmental hazards. So we're going to start first with a question, beyond funding, what do you think the governor can do to hold local school districts accountable for eliminating the achievement gap in an acceptable timeline?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is, in my mind, this is one of the most important issues, and I think this is one of the most important issues for all families and Latino families in Colorado, and we pay almost no attention to it in our state politics or in national politics. When Alex and I worked together in the Denver Public Schools, I don't think he'll mind my saying that, I'm not trying to, we were fighting every single day to try to close the achievement gap. And we didn't really close the achievement gap. We did see dramatic increases in student achievement for all kids, Latino kids, African American kids, kids living in poverty. In fact, we saw more achievement growth than any urban school district in America, and I'm proud of the work that we did, but we haven't done enough. And to me, this is a glaring civil rights challenge for Colorado. It's a glaring civil rights challenge for the United States of America. We are running, and I'm going to say we, when I say we, I don't mean teachers and principals and school districts. I mean all of us. We've accepted a system of education that was designed in the 17th century or the 18th century. Our kids are living in the 21st century. They need to be prepared for the 21st century economy that they're inheriting. It's why I have said, as governor, I'm going to insist that when kids graduate from high school in this state, they graduate not with the skills to earn a minimum wage, but the skills to earn a living wage, that we have connected the needs of our business community and our employers all over Colorado with the curriculum so kids know that they're going to be able to get the skills to be able to earn that wage. And if they decide to go to college, that's great and that's fine. And maybe later in their 20s, they're going to decide that as well. But we need our kids to be propelled, including our Latino kids, propelled from the year they graduate from high school into the middle class, and today we're not doing that. So that is not something that requires money. It does require attention. It does require an insistence that we don't accept a world where kids are just unlucky because they're born poor in some small place or a rural place in Colorado that's not Boulder or that's not Cherry Creek, and somehow we've accepted that they should have a less good education. I don't accept that. I've never accepted that. And I think this is one of the very fundamental challenges that we face. And I just would say again, this is a big reason why it matters who your governor is, whether they're going to make this a priority or whether it's just going to be lip service, more lip service that's not actually going to change anything.
Thank you, Senator. Parents, Latino parents specifically, should not have to spend years begging a school district to do the right thing for their child. When students are not getting a quality education, Senator, families need more than meetings, complaints, and promises. They need real accountability. In 2025, 79% of Latino voters across Colorado supported giving the Colorado Department of Education stronger enforcement powers so that parents can hold their district accountable when students are not receiving a quality education. Senator, do you support giving CDE actual authority to step in when districts fail students? And if not, how should parents hold their districts accountable?
I think that as a state, I'm glad to look at the CDE issue and ask whether they're doing enough and is there more for CDE to do. But as a state, there's more that we need to do. Look, there are communities all over the mountains where Alex has done a lot of your work, where families feel like their kids go to school and they're not treated equally to the other kids because people don't have the cultural understanding to be able to do that. There are families all over the mountains of Colorado whose kids, when they finish the school day, are going home and they're taking care of their brothers and sisters at home because there is no opportunity for their kids to be able to have the benefit of after-school programs. There are places all over this state where there are one set of families that are able to have sports for their kids, and there's another set of families for whom they might as well go to the moon as be able to have sports for their families. Those are the kind of divisions. And again, to me, this is not a bureaucratic question. To me, this is a what kind of community do we want to have as a state? And this, I don't use these words lightly. In my view, this is a fundamental, unfinished civil rights challenge for America. It's one of the reasons I wanted to run for governor, because we are falling down on the job as a nation. You started by talking about the achievement outcomes that are intolerable in Colorado. If you look at the reading scores and the math scores for kids all over the state, they're not what they should be. We're falling behind Mississippi instead of student growth here in Colorado. That is not acceptable to me. The scores for Latino kids are half of what they are for Anglo kids in Colorado. That's completely unacceptable.
Thank you, Senator. In line with being healthy and healthy communities, environmental justice asks us to question data centers. We know data centers are being sold as economic development in our state, but too often it's the private companies who get the benefits, while the public, our communities, take on the cost. So we're talking about more pressure on the grid, more water use, more infrastructure demands, and more risks for communities who already carry disproportionate burdens. So that's why many of this year's participants oppose House Bill 1030, which would give tax incentives to data centers, and we support Senate Bill 102, which would create guardrails to protect impacted communities. If you were elected governor, what will you do to make sure rural and Latino communities are no longer treated as targets for industries that extract profit while leaving local families with the burden?
So thank you. I mean, part of this is looking at the record too, and the fight that I have led to be able to get money for Colorado for the kind of communities you were just talking about, to be able to replace lead pipes. The fight that I've led to make sure that the floodplain in the South Platte River that runs through Denver, some of the poorest communities in Colorado, actually were lifted out of the danger of that flood. I mean, this is a long time standing, commitment of mine. The fact that I was the only statewide elected official who pushed on the EPA when the Suncor permit was coming up and the state was granting that permit. I was the only one who was saying to the EPA, you need to look harder at this, because I don't believe that the state has done what the state should do. And I should say, by the way, that the whole reason I was there to do that was that families from the neighborhood had said to me that were downstream and downwind of Suncor were demanding that, and the credit should go to them. So in terms of the data centers, look, with data centers and with AI, those kinds of things are related to each other. We're living in a whole new moment that's coming. And I think we need to have a leadership that are willing to make sure that, on the one hand, we're supporting the economic growth as a community that we need to support, so we get the wages you were talking about at the very beginning. And at the same time, we're protecting our civil rights, we're protecting our environmental rights, and that's complicated. And it's often not a one-size-fits-all solution. And we need people in these jobs that are nimble enough and courageous enough to be able to hold all of that in their mind at the same time. And I will do that.
Thank you, Senator. So we're in the last portion. We have 15 minutes left to hear from the candidate here. This is our rapid fire section, where we hope to get a straightforward yes or no, or a very short answer. Okay? So that we can get.
That's very generous. That's a very short answer.
So that we can get through several.
Yes or no is what hard. Good.
Several items. We have some bills, some ballot initiatives, and some questions around your leadership in this section.
Thank you.
As you know, Latino Advocacy Day is our lobby day. So you're now going to experience why more than 5,800 Latinas and Latinos have made the choice to travel to their state capital over the last 20 years. We're going to turn to some of those participants today to ask the next few questions about very specific bills. Crisol?
Michelle. Sorry, one change.
Michelle?
Michelle.
Hello.
Hi, Senator.
Hello, Michelle.
I am Michelle Avila Quintero, and I am from Thornton, Colorado. My dad has worked in construction. My dad, Miguel, has worked in construction over 25 years, and most currently in painting. So he often comes home dizzy, exhausted, and burned from being out in extreme heat with no real protections. The majority of Latinos support stronger protections for workers facing dangerous heat and cold on the job. HB 26-1272 would require common sense workplace protections so people are not forced to risk their health just to earn a paycheck. If you were governor, Senator, could we count on you to sign HB 26-1272 into law to ensure workers in Colorado are protected from extreme temperatures at work?
I think that we should protect people. I haven't looked at the bill, so I'll have to look at the bill. But let me say this, though. I want to be very clear about this, too. We need to make sure, I think there's a feeling in our state that we have to protect the health and safety of people and at the same time have a growing economy. I believe that's the feeling of the Latino community in Colorado as well. And when you see restaurants closing all over our state, when you see small businesses closing all over our state, many of them run by immigrants because they're unable to contend with the laws and regulations that some of which have been passed without people thinking through what the effect is actually going to be. I think we need somebody in this job who's actually able to balance all this together. And I want to make sure I say that very clearly because you can say no, but that's okay. We can disagree about that. We have to have a growing economy if we're going to have the wages that is the #1 issue of the people that are responding to the poll for this group. Thank you for the question.
Kaya?
Hi.
Hi, Senator. My name is Allison. I'm from Aurora. My family and friends live in fear of having any interaction with law enforcement because too often people do not know who is stopping them, what agency they are with, or what the rules are around immigration enforcement. This paralyzing fear breaks trust, creates anxiety that takes a real toll on our mental health and risks the safety of entire communities. HB 26-1275 would help make sure state and local officials identify themselves clearly and are properly trained on Colorado laws. If you were governor today, could we count on you to sign HB 26-1275 into law to ensure families are treated with transparency, consistency, and dignity?
I've not read it, but I definitely believe that people should not be masked in Colorado. I believe that people should not be banging down doors or knocking on doors without warrants. I believe that ICE should have to follow the same rules as local law enforcement. I believe that all of us should have the right to enforce civil liability against federal law enforcement that's coming through. And those are the things that I've worked on over and again as a senator, and it's what I would want to work on with you as governor.
Thank you, Allison, for that question. And now Kaya for our last question.
Hi, Senator. My name is Kaya, and I'm from Grand Junction. Through my experience, I've engaged and worked with unhoused individuals who were directly impacted by predatory eviction practices that resulted in them losing their homes. They had little opportunity to fix the issues that could have prevented them from being evicted. Families going through a hard stretch have little to no chance to catch up or defend themselves. That kind of instability hits children, parents, and entire communities. The majority of Latinos support stronger protections for tenants so families are not pushed out without a fair process. House Bill 1106 would strengthen eviction protections and give renters a fairer chance to stay housed and avoid being thrown into crisis. If you were governor today, could we count on you to sign House Bill 1106 into law to ensure more Colorado families have a fair shot to remain in their homes?
Thank you. I will also look at that. I, as a senator, am the first member of the Congress, House or the Senate to ever write a piece of evictions legislation. And I wrote it because I believe it's a terrible remedy for families and for communities. And it's incredibly costly. And when I think about the kids that I used to work for in the Denver Public Schools and how incredibly disruptive evictions were, you know, you can't, you're doing everything you can right, and maybe but somebody has the ability to be able to show up one day and put all of your stuff on the sidewalk in front of your house. And your kids come home from school and all of a sudden they now have to find somewhere else to live. That doesn't make sense for that family, but when that's a remedy that's used over and over again, and it's often at the same time in communities, the economic expense, the cost to kids' education, the cost, it just, you know, it should be used rarely and sparingly. And instead, we should be figuring out how to, as I said earlier, make housing much more affordable in this state so people can depend on it, rely on it, and not consume their entire savings to be able to, or even have savings, to be able to take care of their kids.
Thank you for your very short answers. We appreciate you. I have
Shortish,
a ballot initiative that I'm going to give you some context about. There is right now Initiative 95, which all of us as voters in Colorado will likely see on our ballot in the fall. It is an anti-immigrant constitutional amendment to the 2026 ballot requiring law enforcement to notify the U.S. Department of Homeland Security when a person is charged with a violent crime or any crime if that person has a prior felony conviction, if law enforcement cannot determine the person is lawfully present. Do you support or oppose this ballot?
I don't think we should change Colorado law, so I would not change it consistent with that ballot initiative.
Thank you. There is another initiative, the same proponents have brought another ballot initiative that would significantly change Colorado's fentanyl laws. Proposition 85 would make any possession of fentanyl, whether someone knowingly or unknowingly has it, a felony. It would also redefine distribution and transfer, including sharing drugs, so that any amount of fentanyl, whether known or unknown, would be charged as a level 1 drug felony, carrying a mandatory sentence of 8 to 32 years in prison. Do you support or oppose this ballot?
I will say this first. I think that fentanyl is a huge problem in Colorado and across this country, and it's doing a huge amount of damage. I don't think the answer to that is the mandatory sentences that are described in that referendum. So that is my view of that.
Great. Thank you.
And by the way, you know, it's similar to, do I have time to say one more thing or no?
One more thing.
No, go ahead.
Because I have one more question.
Go ahead. You do
Okay.
your one more question.
We talked about the role of the governor. It is a formal role in lawmaking. It is also a leadership role in Colorado. So in regards to leadership, the governor appoints a cabinet to oversee agencies that serve diverse communities across the state. How will you ensure your appointments reflect both the integrity needed to earn back public trust and the lived experience necessary to effectively serve Latino families?
If you look at the people that I had working around me when I was superintendent of schools, or that I was working around when I was superintendent of schools, it was an incredibly diverse group of people from incredibly diverse walks of life. I don't, and I will do the same as governor, both rural and urban, Latino, African American, Anglo. I mean, everybody. We need everybody to be able to make the best decisions. I do not get up in the morning believing I have a monopoly on wisdom. I never do. Maybe that comes from being a school superintendent, because literally nobody agrees with you when you're the superintendent of schools about anything. But it's not that agreement that I'm looking for, it's disagreement that I'm looking for us to be able to create the imagination we need to move the country forward, to move our state forward. And I just want to make one point about this. I want to say how important it is that the people in this room are the age most of the people are that are in this room. It is so unusual to have a meeting of people when we're talking about the issues that we're talking about today who are as young as the people that are in this room. And I have been doing meetings all over the state in rural and urban Colorado with people that are much younger than the average age of people that show up at my meetings, because I think the fundamental question people have in our state, in addition to everything we talked about today, is, are our kids ever going to be able to afford to live in Colorado? Our kids don't believe they are going to be able to live in Colorado. Housing, childcare, healthcare, education, nowhere I go, and no one's asking them what they think. And that's why this lobby day, not just this year, but every year, is so important, because it is a new generation that's coming here. And I want to tell you very clearly from this stage That's going to be a big difference of my governorship compared to the ones we've had before, because I'm most interested in what the next generation of Colorado thinks about the stuff we're dealing with here. You know, at this stage of my career, my political party really is my own 3 daughters and the kids that I used to work for in the Denver public schools and the kids all over rural Colorado whose parents want the same thing as the kids that I work for in Denver want. That's why I'm running for this job to begin with. So I think it's such a vital question that I just want to draw 2 real underlines underneath it and say, one, how unusual it is to have people of this age here. And I view that as the beginning of an incredibly important relationship if I'm fortunate enough to become governor.
Thank you. And I appreciate that observation. We all know this to be true. In our community, leadership is intergenerational. Our abuelitas y abuelitos, all the way down to our kids, everybody's voices matters, and I think you see that reflected today. So we have come to a close, and I would now invite you to give 5 minutes for your closing remarks. And what is the parting message you would love to leave?
Thank you very much. The parting message first I'd like to leave is how grateful I am that you're here, irrespective of the conversation that we had and my run for governor. I just am grateful that you have been willing to take the time to come from all over the state to make your voices heard, because it's the only way anything will ever change. You know, it's life and death for us. It is. I don't disagree. We are living in a gilded age in America right now. We are living at a time when there's one set of rules for the people at the very top and another set of rules for everybody else. We're living at a time when there is very little economic mobility, when people feel like no matter how hard they work, they cannot get ahead. When people feel like no matter how hard they work, their kids are never going to live a better life than the life they've led. That is what we mean, I think, by the American dream, is to know that if you work hard, your kids are going to live a better life than you have led. We've lost that in our country. We have lost that in our country. And as I said earlier, Donald Trump is the cause of lots and lots and lots of problems. But he's also a symptom of our fundamental issue. And the fundamental issue is that lack of economic prosperity, that lack of a sense that if we work hard, which everybody in this room does, and the communities all over the state does, that we can get ahead. And I think we need to show that in Colorado we can do that. We need to show that in Colorado we have a growing economy, not one where businesses are leaving, which is what is happening today, but we have a growing economy so that we can answer the first question on your poll, which is, how do we make sure that there are adequate wages for people in the Latino community in our state? We can't do it if we don't have a growing economy. And then the question is, how do we grow in a way where it's sustainable for families, sustainable for communities, affordable for the Latino community in Colorado, on housing, on healthcare, on childcare? How do we make sure that we have real answers to the questions you asked today about our education system, to the fundamental civil rights challenge, I think, of our time? How do we make sure that people are actually included when it comes to the question of environmental justice? I'm the only candidate in this race who's put an enterprise-wide cap and trade, cap and dividend, cap and invest system, is my proposal on the climate issue. My opponent hasn't done any of that. My view is that we are living at a moment, as we have in previous times in America, that is profoundly reactionary. And we're living in that gilded age as we were 100 years ago. And there's no one riding to our rescue. Colorado's going to have to ride to our rescue. The people in this room are going to have to do it. And the political mobilization that's represented by having you here is exactly what we have to do to build a coalition all across this state to make hard decisions. Not to color inside the lines, not to do what we've been doing for the last 15 or 20 years, but to finally make hard choices that are going to allow us to build more housing in this state, urban and rural, so that no working person has to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. I truly believe in that. I truly believe that should be our goal as a state, to make sure we have a public option so people don't have to get ripped off by their private health insurance industry, to make sure that we have done everything we can to cut the regulation we don't need so that we can deliver more child care in our communities across the state, and so we can drive educational quality for kids no matter what their zip code is. That's the challenge in front of us. It's not a challenge of ideas, it's a challenge of will. It's a challenge of whether we're willing to make those hard decisions together. And in my mind, that's all about building a political coalition. By the way, not just for Colorado, but to set an example in Colorado for the rest of the country about what the answer to Trumpism is, what the answer to chaos and division and hatred is. That answer can come from all of us in Colorado. Thank you for having me this morning. Thank you for everything that you're doing. I really am grateful.
Thank you, candidate Michael Bennet. He's running for governor.